In 1918, New York State finally finished a 13-year enlargement project on the Erie Canal that in all likelihood would be her last. Shippers wary of a canal built for mule teams and tow ropes wanted to make the trip from the Great Lakes to New York City directly on motorships that were both large enough to brave the Great Lakes storms and at the same time small enough to fit into the locks of the Erie Canal. In time, a fleet of nearly 100 such vessels would fill the locks of this new barge canal. But in the end, their day passed as well. Now, over 10 years since the last of these ships was retired, one distinguished member of that fleet has returned to give us one last look at the way things once were on the Erie. Meet the 84-year-old Day Peckinpah.
The saga of the Day Peckinpah begins at the winter meeting of the Canal Society of New York State in either 1999, 1998, something like that. And a fellow from Troy, New York, Tom Prindle, and his colleague, Rob Goldman, presented on the Day Peckinpah that they thought they would like to secure the vessel, purchase the vessel, and convert it into a mobile hotel boat. So it was a year later or so, and that deal fell through. They couldn't put the cable together, and so now we're about the year 2000. So out of the clear blue one day, I was sitting here at this desk thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we took the Day Peckinpah, if we somehow we could get the Day Peckinpah and have it converted into a museum. So eventually I got my courage up and I picked up the phone. I called Sandy Smith, the son of Sid Smith, who was the owner of Erie Sand and Navigation.
My name's Craig Williams, and I'd like to say that if the history of the New York State Canal System was your house, okay, and that house caught on fire, and you're running in to get the most precious artifact, this is the artifact that I would run into to go get. And the reason I say that is because this was the first vessel specifically designed for this third generation of the Erie Canal. Icing on the cake is that it was the last commercial hauler on the canal system. It was in use in central New York up until 1994. Julius Barnes, a great shipping magnate and grain dealer out in the Midwest in New York City, sponsored the construction of the Day Peckinpah, then called the Inner Waterways Line 101, and then 4 others just like it. And they're the forerunners of what was probably a fleet of 100 motorships that would go up and down the canal.
I'm sure everyone by now knows all the partners in the National Park Service, Erie Canal National Heritage Corridor, the Canal Corporation, New York State Museum, the Canal Society of New York State, who purchased the vessel and paid for the towing of it. And so we thank God for the board of directors who approved it, and for the members of the board and the members of the society that stepped up to the plate and made some very sizable donations.
So we hope to make it to Waterford and there just catch our breath for the winter. The goal is to turn it into a floating museum, one that will travel up and down New York State waterways with an exhibit on New York State history within. When I say within, you'll actually be able to go into the old cargo hold of the boat. The cargo hold is a room well over 100 feet long, about 25 feet wide, that you'll be able to go down into, and there'll be exhibits on either side.
So that's the vision. But it's September already, and the day is still at Lockport. Waterford on the Hudson River is 340 miles to the east, and a lot can go wrong between here and there. Fortunately, the ship will have the benefit of an experienced crew. The pilot, on the right, has tugboat and Coast Guard cutter experience, and the engineer on the left was the last engineer of this very ship before it was mothballed in 1994. Finally, the word comes down that everything is ready. The Day will pull out this morning under her own power. But this is an old ship, and so the plan includes a tugboat escort all the way across the state, just in case. As it turns out, the crew of that tug won't even be able to finish the coffee they just poured before a steering problem on the Day will put them all to work. The steering on ships like the Day Peckinpah were designed specifically for the Erie Canal, with a forward pilot house for better visibility up front and large twin rudders for more turning traction at the canal's low speeds. To move those rudders, a hydraulic system similar to the power steering in a car is found in the stern. But the steering wheel is located way at the other end of the ship and connects to the hydraulics by this long shaft and bearing mechanism that's been sitting outdoors, unused, for 10 years. Later in the trip, these joints will move more freely. But now, as the Day slows to enter the first of Lockport's two massive locks, her rudders lose their bite, and the ship's stern begins to come around. Fortunately, 2 Canal Corporation tugs are on hand this morning to get her straight again. Notice that someone had the foresight to send one of those tugs in ahead of the Day, which made an otherwise difficult maneuver quite simple. When Craig Williams told us that these ships were built just to fit these locks, this is what he meant. The clearance there on the port side is only a few feet, and the starboard side is scrubbing the bumpers. Watch the well-meaning man in the orange coat who's trying to help out. The goal today is just to get the ship through Lockport's 2 locks, and that's all. Nobody's in any hurry here, and as you can see by the rate of forward motion, that especially includes being sure that the Day can be stopped before she hits that miter gate. These are just the first 2 of the 35 locks that the Day will have to go through on its trip across the state to the Hudson. The locks at Lockport are of course famous in themselves for the engineering challenge presented by the solid rock at this site when the canal was first constructed in 1825. Those locks were primitive and soon had to be enlarged. One flight of 5 of those improved locks remains for us to see today, alongside these 2 modern ones that were installed by 1918. To say that ships like the Day Peckinpah were built to just fit the Erie Canal does not mean that conditions are ideal for those ships in the entire Erie. Jim Brennan was the last oiler of this very boat. Let's listen to him describe her later years of service in the Eastern Canal.
The boat was owned by Erie Sand and Gravel out of Erie, Pennsylvania. It hauls cement dust. Anything from Mason cement to state-approved cement. We haul it from Oswego, from the port of Oswego, which we were loaded there by the Roman, which was a lake or a Canadian lake. That was it. At one time, they used to pick it up in Pitkin, and we still do it about twice a year. We'd go to Pitkin, Canada, which was where the plant was. And we'd make the lake crossing and pick it up, deliver it to Oswego or to Rome and Rochester. But the Rochester run ended, and it was strictly Rome to Oswego. Right to the end.
Now, the systems that we really need to have operating include the ballast tank system. Because the clearances, the vertical clearances above my head are quite short on the canal system because of the bridges. You can probably see a bridge behind me. That's actually quite a tall bridge. Some of the bridges that we have to get under are not much more than 15 feet high. And right now we're sitting well higher than 15 feet. What the designers of this boat did was put in tanks on the side of the boat, and they run bow to stern. They're all over. And there are pumps that will fill those tanks with water. So like a submarine, this thing will actually dive and go under the bridges. It's particularly a problem out here in the western section because this part of the canal was kind of overlooked in the 1930s when they enlarged the rest of the canal system. The section between the eastern end at Waterford and Oswego from the 1930s on was both deepened, and the clearances over the bridges was raised to 20 feet. And so when this boat was in operation out in that part of the canal in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, no problem. But those bridge clearances were never accomplished out here, nor was the depth increased to 14 feet. I know that there are some parts of the channel up ahead where, because of silting and all sorts of factors, the depth of the canal is only about 5 feet. So I'm still puzzling just how we're going to do that. So stay tuned.
The area that has everyone thinking about water depth is 60 miles to the east, where the Genesee River crosses the canal near Rochester. The 1918 enlargement provided for a channel that was uniformly 12 feet deep. But the Genesee River, which drains a heavily farmed region south of Rochester, is often muddied with silt by the runoff from those fields. The current in the Erie Canal flows gently from west to east at Rochester, but the greater current of the Genesee sweeps the Erie's water northward, leaving river water, including any silt it might be carrying, to supply the Erie's flow eastward from there. Once in the quieter waters of the canal, the river's silt quickly settles to the bottom, creating a modern-day obstacle that would have brought a smile to the faces of the earliest canalers who put it this way.
We are digging a ditch through the mire right up to our necks, damn it. We're digging a ditch through the mire, and the mud is our principal hire. In our pants, in our boots, down our necks, by God, in our pants, in our boots, down our necks.
What we did is we tied up the evening before the crossing at a wall just to the west of the Genesee River crossing. And there, because we had ample clearance on the pedestrian bridges, we ballasted out a good deal. Crossed under our own power with two tugs standing by the following morning. Didn't even really slow down. And then got to the east guard lock, tied up in the guard lock, and ballasted back down. So there was some apprehension there, but everything went up without an inch. We were, inches away from a couple of the bridges. A couple of the bridges were tight, but we knew what height they would be, so that didn't really concern us too much. With drafted down ballasted down, I should say, for some of the lower bridges. She tended to sniff bottom a little bit, so if there was a mud bank or a hump down there, she may suddenly veer off to one side or the other. And she did that a couple times at inopportune moments, but we were able to recover.
We were able to recover is John's modest way of saying that the day was at times a nightmare to try to keep centered in the narrow channel of this western section. Remember that her rudders are still stiff, and that they only control the back of the ship. Add to that the slow speeds required of a ship this size in these close quarters, and it's easy to see why these tugs are along to help out. The designers of the original canal had a difficult decision to make. In the eastern sections, there were rivers and lakes that, if included in the canal, could significantly cut costs, and that could just make the project easier to complete. Their decision, though, was to bypass them all with a completely man-made channel. Remember, in 1817, there were no diesel engines, and steamboats, with their paddle wheels, would have seriously damaged the 4-foot-deep channel with its fragile banks. No, in the canal's first century, animal power would propel the Erie's barges, and those animals needed a continuous towpath to walk on. The 1918 enlargement was about more than just size. Animals, of course, were no longer needed, and so now the rivers and Oneida Lake could be canalized. In the west, there were no natural waterways that were convenient to use, and so the canal there was enlarged, for the most part, on its original course. As we've seen, ships like the Day may fit in the western section, but they're more at home here in the open waters of the east. We're on the Mohawk River now, with its dams and locks and fall scenery almost everywhere you look. When the earliest surveyors set out to plot a course for a canal across New York State, they made a startling discovery, and it was that the Mohawk is no ordinary river. True, like any river, the Mohawk had been busy carving a valley in the landscape along its entire course as it made its way to the sea. But unlike all of the other eastern rivers, which flowed to the Atlantic from the top of the Appalachian Ridge, only the Mohawk in New York State started on the west side of that ridge and flowed across the mountains to the Atlantic. So, the original Erie Canal was dug, complete with its towpath, alongside the Mohawk River all the way from Rome to the Hudson. But it wasn't about being close to the river. It was about being in the groove that the river had cut for them across the Appalachian Mountains.
Well, that song, 15, which was originally titled Low Bridge or 15 Years on the Erie Canal, was written by a Tin Pan Alley songwriter, a fellow from Natick, Massachusetts, whose name was Thomas Allen. He was writing this song sort of poking fun at the old canal driver with his straw hat and his mule and the whole thing. And I don't imagine he ever expected that 100 years later it'd be the national anthem of the Erie Canal. But that's the song everybody knows. I've had anthropologist friends tell me that they have heard kids in rural sub-Saharan Africa sing that song in school with absolutely no idea what it was about, which is kind of a kick. So you have people that go through this system every year delivering yachts to the Great Lakes and then taking them down south in the fall. And their knowledge is entirely of the water, of the marinas, of places where you can tie up, you can pump out, you can get good Chinese, you can do your laundry, you can find parts for your boat. And that's the way the canal system looks to them. A couple of 100 yards off the canal, you can find people who don't even know that it still operates as a working system. And they say, what? And particularly, of course, on this wonderful boat, they say, what is that? And the Peckinpah has just on this trip, I think, opened a lot of eyes.
Well, we're nearly there. This last short section down the Waterford flight will only take us a few hours. Before the modern barge canal, though, it wasn't that easy. Passengers traveling on so-called packet boats were often shuttled the 18 miles between Schenectady and Albany by stagecoach, rather than being made to endure long waits at the locks in the stretch ahead. John, our pilot, happens to be from here, so we'll ask him to explain.
Well, the Waterford flight was built to get around the Cohoes Falls. They constitute a lift of 170 feet, a mile and a half. That's the largest lift and the shortest distance of any system of locks anywhere in the world. It's just with those 5 locks, it's twice the total lift of the entire Panama Canal. And the original canal used 16 locks to get it across the same natural obstruction, which is the Cohoes Falls. So it's quite an engineering marvel. There's 2 guard gates, you'll notice, at the upper end of the flight. And that is to protect the low-lying area of Waterford against the waters of the Mohawk River. Having built this canal now, bypassing the Cohoes Falls, it does create a bit of a possible danger to downstream residents in the low-lying areas, which is again the reason for the 2 guard gates. But the Waterford flight is an engineering marvel again. It was one of the it was to the barge canal as the flight of 5 in Lockport was to the earlier era canal system. So it's really interesting. We get to see it today.
I envision this as a vessel that will, first of all, go throughout the entire system. From New York City to Whitehall, into Lake Champlain, coming through the east end of the Erie, right across to Buffalo, the Cuyugan-Seneca Canal to Ithaca, Watkins Glen, Geneva, every point in between, the Oswego Canal. In other words, our system. Why not our Canadian neighbors? It goes to Toronto, goes to Montreal. wherever, and to the south, maybe in the winter. And then it should go to Great Lakes ports. It's just, the Erie Canal was a canal for a nation. It wasn't just a canal for New York State. The story of Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, Utica is the same as Cleveland, Detroit, and Chicago. And it's because of the Erie Canal that they were so successful and they grew so rapidly. And then other things, of course, after that, they grew on their own. But the initial seeds of their growth, there was water by Erie Water.
We hope you've enjoyed our show. Our goal is to go on producing stories about the Grand Erie Canal, and we can use your help with story ideas for future programs and by supporting and recommending our contributors. Classic Craft Woodworks Custom Cedar Watercraft, and Stephen Drew, certified in long-term care planning and serving clients in Central and Western New York. For copies of this or any of our programs, or to reach us for any reason, visit our website at www.lowbridgeproductions.com. And thanks for watching.
That's about it.